Don't get me started.
What got you interested in art to start with, or yeah, where'd that come from?
Probably from cartoons. As a kid, I loved Warner Brothers cartoons and Disney movies, like the old animated features. So me and my family used to go to the movies all the time and see those because they were kind of the only movies that we were allowed to watch. And then I was kind of a latchkey kid, so I would watch endless Warner Brothers cartoons all day long. And then I started reading Mad Magazine and drawing the characters, and just kind of went from there, I think. So all the classics, you know. It was really young. I think I started drawing in like first or second grade or something, just, you know, just doodling cartoon characters. And then it's the kind of thing where like you do some drawings and then other kids go, oh wow, you know how to draw, you know, draw me this, and then you get all excited, and it keeps going from there, kind of thing. So that was my beginning. I went to college in '87, and it was kind of before the internet, or it was, I mean, it was around, but it wasn't around like it is now. And, you know, some multimedia stuff was basically like PC, CD-ROMs things. And at the time, the idea of like, hey, I'm going to be an animator just because I like cartoons was, looking back, was kind of nutty. My parents were really supportive, which was great. And my dad was an artist, but he never pursued it. Like, he became an engineer instead. So I think he kind of encouraged me to live out his fantasy or something. But yeah, I studied animation at San Francisco State, and from there I got into games because there's a lot of games work around here. So, and I liked games as a kid too. So I don't know, it seemed crazy. It was a crazy idea in the beginning, but then it just kind of worked, and now the stuff is everywhere. So it's been a good career. Yeah.
How did the traditional animation education sort of help you with getting into the games industry? Like, was it mostly, when you got in, were people focusing on pixel art, or was it like 3D at the time?
It was mostly pixel art. 3D was still really young then, and it was really crude. It wasn't until like a couple years later, like when I was at LucasArts, that it really started to sort of come into its own. Pixar was, you know, like starting to do amazing things with it, but at that time it was all like, you know, SNES and Game Boy games and stuff, and which was, you know, that's all fashionable now, but at the time it was really frustrating, like the limited palettes and sort of all the constraints on like sprites and just like the art production itself. But I was super excited just to be doing something, just to be working in games and getting paid to like animate wacky characters running around and stuff. So it was okay. But yeah, it was all 2D in the beginning, which was nice because that was my background. And I wasn't really, I had heard about 3D and, you know, it was on the horizon, but I wasn't too interested in it because I've always been into drawing. So 2D animation was like a perfect fit for me. At least it was a good beginning. I eventually segued sort of out of the animation side of things, but it was a good fit at the time.
Was Lucas the first place you ended up at?
No, I went to this really small developer here in San Francisco at first and actually worked on a Game Boy game and a SNES game and like a Sega Saturn game. And then I went to Atari in Milpitas and worked on some arcade games for a while, including Beavis and Butthead, which was pretty exciting at the time just to be working on something like with, you know, household name recognition, and even though it was kind of a stupid project. But and arcade games were fun, but then while I was there, I had a friend, Pete Sakel, who was working at LucasArts, and I would go visit him, and man, I was blown away by like the quality of the art and just everyone there, like the quality of the artists and the art they were producing, the creativity of the games they were working on. It just like, it got me really excited. So when a job came up there, I jumped on it, and it was like a different world from Atari. And no offense to Atari, but it was more my thing, I think.
What were some of the games you worked on for the Game Boy and SNES?
My very first game was Sports Illustrated Golf for Game Boy, which was like, you know, those games are like 5 shades of green. It's from like white to black with green in between. It's so gross. I worked on the Home Improvement game. I think that was, I can't remember what console that was. I'm all flustered right now, but the Home Improvement game, and then the Avengers game, because the Avengers movie was coming out at the time. This was like the first, you know, Avengers remake movie or whatever. But Yeah, that Sports Illustrated golf game was pretty, it was exciting at the time, but looking back, man, it was painful. And just the whole like creating animation and motion within the confines of sprites it was, I don't know, it was like being chained and shackled while you're trying to draw or something, but it worked, you know, and it was fun to work on something that, you know, because I didn't have any friends that were, at that time, that were in games or doing anything sort of creative, so it was neat to be working on something like that. I wasn't discouraged, though. I was excited, and I was able to come up with sort of like a new way to create the assets that made their art production pipeline go a lot faster. So I was pretty excited to be like solving problems, even within restrictions. There's always like some better way to do things, or some way to like dig in and get interested and sort of solve problems and be satisfied. So I was happy at the time, but I was only there for 3 months and then I was happy to leave. And it's funny because that little project that I'm talking about now is sort of like every project I've ever worked on has sort of been another variation on that, where we faced sort of those same basic problems that had to be like acknowledged and addressed early on to avoid bigger problems. So even that dumb little golf game, like it was sort of like the outline for every other game ever to come. So I did learn something, yeah.
When you went to Lucas with Peter, what did you find yourself working on there?
Well, I was hired to work on Herc's Adventures, which was like a top-down 2D animated game made by, it was actually made by Big Ape, which was a company in San Rafael that used animators and artists from LucasArts to make their art and animation. They'd made a game called Zombies Ate My Neighbors, which is pretty well known, and this was sort of their follow-up to that. So it was a similar game starring Hercules and, you know, all the Greek gods and goddesses. So I worked on that for about 10 months, and that just sort of got my foot in the door. And the cool thing about that was that my desk was right outside Tim's office, Tim Schafer, of course. And so we kind of became friends. He was friends with Pete, because Pete was working on Full Throttle at the time. So I would come by and check out what Pete was working on, and Peter Chan was there too, and I would come by and look at his stuff and be amazed. And then, you know, whenever Tim would come out of his office, he'd sort of walk by my desk and look at what I was working on, and he'd usually be like, oh, that's pretty cool. And then I remember towards the end of the project, they had me do caricatures of everyone on the team and animate them. So I did that, and Tim was so impressed with those caricatures. I don't know why, it was like the most ridiculous thing in the world, but he just was like, that's so, oh, I love that. Oh, it looks just like him or her or whatever. And I kind of feel like those dumb little caricatures were what got me to work on Grim Fandango. I mean, I think we were already friends at that point, but it was like, he was visibly impressed with these like little tiny like pixel, top-down pixel caricatures of the team. So who knows where stuff will lead, you know, but it was only a 10-month project at that point when I was on it. Yeah. And then I went on to Grimm, so that was cool. I actually left LucasArts after Grimm because there was a big sort of change in the winds there. The new Star Wars movies were ramping up, and they were sort of focusing less on sort of like creative, I don't want to say creative, but less on sort of unique properties and more on just being like a Star Wars factory, you know, or making games to support the movies, which is smart. I mean, but I wasn't really interested in that at the time, so I actually quit and moved away for a year. And during that year, Tim started up Double Fine, and I had actually moved to New York, and I was trying to start a new career as an illustrator there. And then September 11th happened, and after that, I was like, oh man, I want to move back to San Francisco. I've had enough of New York. Plus, it was just, there were no jobs there after that. And I called up Tim, and he said, hey, I have this new company, you know, it's been going for about a year at that point. We need an artist. And so I moved back and took that job. So I started, I think 2001, it was like a year after the company started. So I missed the first year, but I've been here pretty much for the whole run ever since.
But like, what are your actual responsibilities, and what do you find yourself having to do every day?
Well, I think it's different on every project. It's probably different at every company. They probably each have their own definition. But here, for me at least, it's been to sort of guide the initial design process. That's like the beginning, you know, like what is this going to look like, and, you know, help the other artists that are on the project help everybody sort of move in the same direction and set a style. And then once the style and the designs are sort of nailed down, then it becomes more like managing the production phase and keeping everyone on track and sort of making sure that that style pushes all the way through the project. So that includes like scheduling tasks, giving feedback as needed, having dailies with the artists and animators, and just sort of keeping an eye on all that stuff and making sure that it's all fitting in that world that you're trying to create. And since we have such small teams here and such short projects, I also end up doing a lot of the art and animation myself too. So I'm also like working and producing assets and stuff. So I have to keep my own stuff in line with what everyone else is doing. So it's really hands-on, and it's really, I mean, that's what I like about that role here, is that it's not only like managing and giving feedback, but you're also creating still. So every part of the process is you have sort of like your hand in.
So when Brad came to talk to you about Massive Chalice, like it was barely an idea at the time. So how do you even sort of start from scratch and develop like a visual style there?
Well, it's interesting because this is the Kickstarter phase of the project. It was a really, we didn't have much time to do that. It was, you know, we were basically given like a month, I think, looking back. It's getting a little foggy, but I think it was a month. We had a small team and they were like, let's do this, you know? So it was a lot of intense like meetings, you know, with brainstorming, where everybody's like, what is this project? You know, what does it look like? What can we do, you know? What can we do at different price levels? And because the whole Kickstarter thing is kind of, at that point, and even still, it was kind of like this new universe where you're like, you don't know what you're going to get. And you sort of have to present a feasible plan and say, this is what we can do. You know, we think it's cool. We're going to make this the best we can within these limits. Do you want to be a part of it? And people were excited. And I think Brad's personality as the project leader had a lot to do with, you know, the success of the game. He's like a natural sort of leader, he has a lot of charisma, and he's super funny. And I think he helps to bring in a lot of backers and he helps to like boost interest and morale and just make things fun. So it was a lot of meetings with like the core group of the Kickstarter design team, whatever that was. It was like 5 or 6 people, I think. Just hashing out like, what's the story, who are the characters, what's the world. And once we had the basics, then we were like, okay, what does all this stuff look like? And then that's when we started to sort of like dig into concept art, well, not concept art, but reference art, find things that were going to influence the style, set the basis for like the visual look, and then we quickly did as much concept art as we could before the launch and put all those key pieces of concept art in to say like, you know, we don't have much to show, but this is what we think. This is the direction we're going in, and we're excited by it, kind of thing. I think pretty quickly in that 1 month period, we decided, you know, what can we do in the amount of time we're asking for with the amount of people we have, which is a small team, and on this scale, you know, because the characters would be really small, the worlds would be, you know, large, and the characters would be small, and you'd be seeing them small on screen, and there'd be several characters on screen a lot of the time. So I think pretty quickly we said low poly, you know. Simplified, stylized, low poly approach would be cool. It would be smart from, you know, a production standpoint, but it would also be cool. And of course, since then it's become, I mean, not that we started or anything. I mean, it was already, I think, getting popular, but now it's pretty huge. You know, the whole like low poly look is everywhere. So I think it was a good choice, and it certainly made sense from like a production standpoint. But it was also exciting for us because we'd never really, as a company, I don't think Double Fine had done like a intentionally low poly project. So it was fun, and it was like, how do we make low poly interesting? You know, how do we make it stylized? Let's find reference art that makes it exciting, and that was our challenge. And I think we did a good job of finding stuff that made it exciting and stylized. So as part of that process, we wanted to present, you know, a style guide, something that said, this is what it looks like, or these, you know, these are our influences, this is what we're thinking, here's our thought process. And so I put together this Massive Chalice style guide, and just to make sure that everyone was on the same, you know, the same page. This was Well, it was kind of the synthesis of everything that we talk about in this style guide. This was kind of like the final image that was like the big sell piece for the Kickstarter campaign. This sort of took every idea that we were talking about and put it, on the page. And it's really striking to me still. I mean, I still look at this and I think, wow, that's, it's such a cool style, and it kind of just came out of all of our design meetings, and it really worked.
So this is is this the first piece that you did?
This was the first batch where I started this style, but I was trying to I did this more for myself, this kind of style where I was like trying to focus on shape and color in chunks. So like I would take the lasso tool and like fill it with a color or whatever, and try to make something out of it. And that was mainly just so that I could force my brain to think about like color more and shape, instead of doing like a drawing where like thinking about like silhouette and shape is there's more to think about when you're also thinking about form at the same time. So I started doing it this way, and they started turning out really cool. Like I thought they looked really sweet. So I did a few, and I did these guys, and then I had this in my head. We had been talking about like ancestors, and Brad was talking about how he wanted these like cool ancestor attacks, where like all your ancestors would join you on battle, and you could like fight with them. So I thought it'd be cool if they were all flowing out of a cape, and so I used that sort of same style to just like mock up a really quick sketch, just as an idea. I didn't think it would go anywhere really. And yeah, everyone really responded to the idea, and they wanted me to flesh it out more.
Derek's an amazing artist. He's like a dream artist to work with as like a supervisor. Not that I even really supervised him. I mean, just like as a teammate, he's the guy where you'll be in a meeting talking, and you'll be like, hey, it'd be cool if everything kind of went in this direction, and then like an hour later he'll send out this painting, and it's like, hey, is this what you mean? And we're like, fuck, that's so awesome. It's like he understands, he totally gets it, and he's got sort of like great taste and amazing artistic chops, and he's fast. So it's like, in that kind of a situation, when you're kind of under the gun, limited time, limited resources, that's the guy you want to have. And plus his stuff looks really polished. So it's not like messy ideas. It's like, it's pretty final art and pretty stylized as we saw with that package. So it's been great working with him.
And then we showed it to Peter Chan, he was sort of our like mentor during the beginning of this project. He was like really helping us out, like trying to organize our brains to think it the right way. And he had a really good point that like it should probably be blue, just because that's a like first read, like ghosts should be blue in general. If that's all they see, if that's all the person sees and knows about the project, they'll immediately realize that like what we're trying to get across better than this sort of like orange. They look more like energy, and maybe they don't come across quite as like, they don't look as dead when they're orange, I guess.
So the way that we sort of came about this image is through all of these things. So in these design meetings, we had certain key story elements that were always kind of in the back of our minds. The crux of Massive Chalice is that it's an epic timeline. The game takes place over hundreds of years. It's an old and ancient world, and it's all about like the epic legacy. And part of that legacy are the family bloodlines, and how the heritage and the traits are passed down from one generation to another. Another key element of the story is, of course, the society has classes with clear roles for everyone. Everyone's got their job and their specialty, whether they're an archer, a rogue, a stonemason, or whatever. And then, of course, humans versus demons. It's all about the humans fighting off the demons. And so there's our story jumping off point. So then it becomes, what does it look like and what direction do we go in? Well, some early ideas to distinguish the humans from the demons were to, have more organic shapes in the humans. They would have cloth because the idea of the ancestral cloak was an important one. Mm. And we wanted to tie that into all of their uniforms and their house colors, and so they would have flowing cloth signifying that ancestral cloak. And then to make the demons stand out against that, we thought hard shapes, for contrast. Maybe they have hard insect armor or exoskeletons. Maybe instead of walking on 2 legs, they walk on 4, or they float, or they slither. And then maybe one cool idea was that, after you defeat a demon, maybe you could repurpose part of their bodies into weapons, since they have these hard bodies and hard skeletons. Mm-hmm. So those were some sort of starting points. So then we started thinking about the culture of the game, and of course, the historic cultural basis for the game is sort of this medieval world, but we didn't want to go in the Game of Thrones direction, the standard thing. We were like, what does Double Fine do with this world? What can we do to make this world different? Mm-hmm. We're also working in that low poly, environment and human art style. So the first person we looked at was Mike Mignola. He's an amazing artist, and we really liked his solid blocky shapes. The characters are carved out of rock, and they have these super clear, hard line shadows that just make everything read really well. And they also have their proportions. They have these big blocky hands, big blocky feet, and that kind of thing reads really well from a distance. So that was our starting point. Then we started looking at, since these characters were going to be low poly, we thought, well, they're kind of like figurines. Well, what are some interesting figurines, And Ashley Wood is doing some cool figurines, and you got the Hellboy figurines, and this Batman figurine is just amazing, and I think that's just like the ultimate style guide right there, was all in that character, because it's just like stylized proportions, super clear planes and shadows, everything looks chiseled and simple. It's almost like a high poly version of a low poly model or something. It's just it's really appealing to me, and I think to everyone else on the team at the time. So that was an exciting sort of thing. Then of course the demons. How are we going to make them look different? What art is going to influence that? So we started looking at, Wayne Barlow, who is the go-to guy for demons, I think, for a lot of people, and Beksinski, and they do, just the things that they do with their proportions and their limbs. They have the really odd body shapes and the really weird, this guy's bones are on the outside of his body, or he's wearing bones as his clothing or armor. It's wow, it looks like a uniform made out of demon bones. It's really cool. And then, you get these weird skinny legs and multiple limbs and stuff that don't look human. So immediately you see that and you think, that's a demon.
Yeah, it's every project I've ever been on. It's wouldn't it be cool if we did a game that looked exactly like Barlow stuff? I think that's every game I've ever worked on.
The danger with that sort of is that if everything gets too spindly, then you don't see it in the game. So we had to be careful of that. Everything has to read from a distance. Well, those demon, Barlow and Beksinski, they're cool, but they're a little busy. So we thought, how can we pull this back more towards Mignola? And we found, Guy Davis, who does sort of a simplified graphic take on that same sort of demon idea. You've got these blocky limbs, and everything's stylized. It's a little bit Mike Mignola-esque. It's a little more graphic than, say, Barlow. And then I think this was Derek's idea. This was a really cool idea. I mean, at that time, we had limited time, but we also, you don't want to just jump for the first thing. You want to stay creative and keep your options open and keep thinking what if. And one thing I think Derek threw this out there was Dave McKean, and he said, what if the demons were pieced together from pieces, say of human pieces, maybe these are old body parts from dead warriors or something, who knows? But it was sort of this collage idea, and that got everybody really excited. And then this is just one example of a possible way to reuse sort of demon technology. After you defeat them, you could use their technology or their body parts as your armor, you know, so, and then use that against them. So that was another interesting idea. So now we come to like, how do we make this low poly look interesting? You know, how do we make it stylized? And I think this was another Derek idea. Man, he's full of good ideas. This sort of German poster art. And if you look at these characters' faces especially, they're all broken up into planes. And that, you know, like the eyes are just these shadowy sockets. You don't need to see everything. Like things in the shadows, you know, they recede, and the details, you know, are just out in the light. And with a low poly character seen from a distance, it's almost like a statue again, or a figurine, and it's just a really cool stylized way to present a limited amount of information. So that was another cool stylistic idea. So we also, on the project, at that point, we pulled in Peter Chan, and we brought him in as sort of like a consultant. He was busy, he couldn't actually do any concepts, but he sent us lots of reference stuff. And so when we started talking about cultural references and cultural influences, he sent us stuff like this, you know, these things from medieval Poland, because at the time we were thinking, you know, okay, these are uniforms. What's a sort of a creative way that we can attach these like heritage cloaks or their flags or their house banners to their uniforms without just like giving them a flag? And so the idea of like these strange poles that are attached to the characters' backs, you know, and you could put streamers or banners or whatever coming off that, just, you know, and you saw that in that first image, you know, the image with the flowing thing coming off the guy's back rails. It's just like, it's a weird idea, but look, here it is, you know, this other culture has done it, and it exists in reality, and it was a nice cultural reference that Peter sent us. He sent us, you know, medieval Russian monarch era, because like, so it's in the medieval era, but instead of doing like the standard Game of Thrones medieval era, what about this Russian monarch era? You know, their clothes all look different, you know, their buildings are different. They mix and match all these different fabrics, and they use a lot of like cloth and fur elements. And it's like, oh, cloth and fur elements are something that you don't really think about a knight wearing, you know, and it's interesting, and it gets you going in a direction, in a new direction. The same thing with like this Mongolian culture. They're doing a lot of the same like cloth and fur things, armor mixed with cloth. They also have these really cool like designy elements all over their armor that you don't see like a normal medieval knight. They're not painting, you know, crazy designs all over their armor, and it's awesome, and it makes them stand out. And you can maybe say, you know, this guy's house, they all have this design on their armor. This guy's house has this design. So it was another good cultural influence. Yeah, this was just like this was another influence, but this is more like an illustration or a stylistic influence. He's talking about, with this, we're looking at muted colors and patterning. You know, I think in general we wanted the colors to be muted because we're trying to show that this is an ancient world, and those colors have faded over time. You know, what's happened to those colors? They've dulled and deadened over time, and it shows the passage of time without saying it. So it's a visual cue that helps sell the story. So then I think this was Derek again. He always pulls in like the unique influences, and he pulled in Alexander McQueen, fashion designer. And I think this was partially for the humans and partially for the demons. The idea of these long flowing organic cloth shapes, which you again saw in that first image with the ancestral cloak, came from this stuff. And then these weird, crazy, you know, this guy's got red skin, this guy's got blue skin, you know, here's this weird hat and these really odd, otherworldly, like, silhouettes to the fashion that, I mean, is grounded in reality. You know, people have seen it before, but it's odd and it's interesting, and it has a lot of visual appeal. So it was another good influence. I mean, at some point you have to stop sort of collecting reference and influences and get started drawing. But we took sort of all of those influences and used them as our sort of corral, and tried to work within those parameters or those fence posts, as Peter Chan would say, to start in on our concept art. And so you can see a lot of those elements. These are Derek's concepts, and you can see down at the bottom sort of where he's getting elements, and he's just sort of taking them from those influences and mixing and matching them and throwing them together and seeing what works and what doesn't. And you get these, here's those weird back posts with the cloak floating off it. Here's the fur with an armored chest plate. Here's this crazy hat that this dude is wearing in this culture, and it's like all these elements start to sort of work together in this weird way. And since you're not really just like pulling them out of thin air, they all have sort of a legitimacy about them, or like they feel real. They feel like they're grounded in the world, even though you may not know what Mongolian medieval culture looks like. So it was a good start. And he also, while he was mixing and matching, so this is Derek, Derek is doing most of this concept stuff, and while he was mixing and matching those cultures, he's also refining that sort of German poster art style with that magnolia faceted low poly look, and starting to develop that in an interesting way with the muted color palette thrown in to boot. So he's thinking about everything. And then I think here's just another like chunky and angular. This is just a test. You got to try a bunch of things before you settle. But the humans were off to a good start, I think, with those concepts. And then these are Raz's concepts. He started to work on the demons, and of course, thinking back to like Barlow and Beksinski, it's like the insect limbs. How do we make them different? I think these were maybe getting a little too insecty for Brad. I think at one point he said, let's not go insect style. Let's pull them back a bit. But these again were like first concepts, So they would be like soft-bodied demons with these hard exoskeletons, and maybe after you kill this guy, you take this and you wear it as your helmet or your shield or something, and it's just a cool idea. So then here's just some like sort of, these are Raz's. These are just sort of style tests, and this is him taking sort of a new approach to the Magnolia style, incorporating kind of everything else that we talked about. And he explored these ideas. But then I think Derek took this idea, like these proportions and these colors and these ideas, and then did it in that sort of German poster art style, and I think that really was when everything came together. And then these are just exploring different ideas of, here's the Dave McKean, the collaged, face made out of old parts, and here's maybe this guy's ancestors, the souls of his ancestors float around him. Maybe he doesn't have like an ancestral cloak. Maybe his ancestors are right there. Maybe they follow you into battle as ghosts, So it's just exploring. Here's that Dave McKean thing, but you can see that like the characters are starting to break up a little bit too much, and you can't really tell what's going on, especially if this was really small on the screen. This might not read, this might not read, this might not read, but it makes for cool concept art, though, and it's an exciting idea. We started thinking about the environments, and again, it's an epic world. It's really old, and so how do you show that in the environments? Maybe you show the strata of the soil. Maybe you see layers of sedimentary civilizations on top of each other, piled on top of each other, and they just build right on top of the old civilizations. It's a cool idea, and that over time all the colors have worn away to be muted, and it just gives this eerie, otherworldly, ancient feel to everything. And then of course everything has to be giant. It's got to be massive, right? And it's got to be carved from rock, because that's how you do it. So of course then again it's Beksinski, and these are just amazing. This is just reference just to get everybody excited, but it gets that idea across. And I think that's it for the original style guide. But I can give you like sort of a concrete example of how there was a problem. People weren't really into the way an environment was looking, and they said, what can you do? And I sort of took a look at it and said, well, here's what I think, and then I was able to just do it, and then everybody liked it. So here's the concept. It's the capital level. It's where the final battle takes place. And initially in the concept, this is by Derek, it's a nice, great concept. He had made sort of this like diamond-shaped pattern on the floor, and then the sort of the side areas have these other diamond shapes, which, this is a really nice concept, and this looks good here. But then once it was in the game, people weren't really into it. It looked a little 80s or like Saved by the Bell because you have all this purple going on. So I think that especially with this texture over here, people were not into that. I think this one, people liked this more, maybe just the color felt wrong. So this was Derek's original concept, and then he also did this concept of sort of like a ruined capital after the final battle. And I looked at this and I thought, well, these colors look way more like royal and regal to me than like the sort of 80s purple style. I thought, what if we just went with like sort of like this royal gold look to everything? And Brad was into that. He said, yeah, that sounds good. So I can show you how I went about doing that. This is what the level originally looked like, and you can see it's a little busy. It's looking a little crazy right here. I mean, it looked better in the concept, I think, than in reality. I brought Derek's concept into Photoshop, and I zoomed in on an area where I really thought like the colors were working. Like these colors look great with the chalice here, and it really gives it this sort of like ethereal feel. So I basically just copied that, and I brought it in here, and I thought, you know, I just pasted it in just to see how the colors might work, and I thought, yeah, that looks kind of cool. So I just quickly added this color layer on top of the old texture, because everybody liked the old texture, they just didn't like the colors. And I changed the color just like that. So I've changed that texture pretty easily. I mean, this one was a little trickier. So this one, nobody was into this texture, and they just wanted it replaced. First thing, I just changed the color to match that world. So it's already, even if you don't like the design, it's already at least in the right color family. So then as part of this project, a lot of the material blends in the environments have like geometric patterns as sort of their alphas and their basis for their designs. So we have kind of a library of geometric patterns. So I found this one, which is totally the wrong colors, but I like the design. It feels like a really cool inlaid floor, but now you can see that it's in the same realm as this texture. They're both pretty muted, they're both got that sort of dark golden brown feel to them. So I'm gonna try this one. So there, so now the textures have changed, and it looks better, it feels better, but one of the things that I noticed when we were in the level was that the scale of the textures also felt weird, like it felt too large, and it kind of didn't fit with the scale of the ground textures in the other environments. So one thing I want to do is change the scale of the tiling on these things. So I just want to scale this up, and as I scale this up, you can see the texture is getting smaller on the model, which is what I want to happen. And I think that feels a little better, and I think it's more the right scale. So, and now I'm going to relaunch the game, and we'll see how it looks. So now it's got my new textures in there. So I think the scale feels better, feels more appropriate, and I'm really digging that new side texture there. I think that feels a lot more, it's got more gravity to it, but it still has the playful, designy sort of like elements to it. I'm not like poking fun at this, but it looked like a casino floor, like the, you know, like in Reno or something.
Old movie theater, maybe.
So I think this looks more like a nice like marble floor or tile floor, but it needs to be shiny, right?
It feels more like, I guess without having any shine on it, it feels like wood.
Yeah, especially the sides, right?
Yeah.
Like a wood floor.
Mm-hmm.
So once we add some shine to it, I think it'll feel better. So there were no normal maps before, so I'm gonna have to make them. So the normal map for this texture, since I want this to just be like a sheer, shiny floor, the only thing I really want bump-wise are these, maybe some little, you know, scuffs in the floor and stuff. So I brought in like this sort of like scratched up thing, and I think that's gonna be good enough for this floor, for a normal map. So then I'm gonna go into crazy bump. Watch out, it's crazy. So let's see, open, and this is like, this program makes it so easy, it's crazy bump. It makes it crazy easy to make a normal map. So here we go.
Whoa.
So here is the first, so that's what the first thing, you know, the first attempt at that is, but I'm gonna like, we don't need all these large details. We don't need these large details. I just want a more subtle, like minor scuffing kind of thing going on here. So I'm just going to do this really quickly. So we'll save this. So I'm going to open that file that we just created in Photoshop. Okay, so there it is. So I'm going to export this. And then I want to do the same thing for the other floor tile, but I won't take you through that whole process again because it's basically exactly the same. There, save that. So now neither of them had any gloss maps, and we're going to need some glossiness. So I'm going to open, so here's that floor texture. Let me hide these guides. Go away, guides. So I'm going to go back to sort of, this was the basis for my normal map. But since this texture has this design element in it, and I want to have some pop and different texture, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make these crosshairs be the shiniest part, almost like in a floor where they have like gold sort of like inlay. And then I want to make these lighter squares shinier also, but not as shiny as that gold. So all I did was I created sort of like gloss maps work, white is shiny, black is no shiny. So the lighter it is, the shinier it'll be. So I made this the shiniest part. This is sort of medium shiny, and then this is like less shiny. So I'll just export this. So then we'll do the same thing for this one. And this one, I just want the whole thing to be equal shininess, except for the scuffs. So I'm just going to do this. All right. So now, let's go back and look at the floor. So you can see what the floor looks like. It's a little dull. Hopefully, let's go in here. So now this is the material for that part of the floor. So I want to go in and add that normal map and that gloss map. So we just go down to specular properties. I'm just going to point to this gloss texture that we just made. All right, and then I'll do the same thing to the other material. Okay, it looks shinier. You can see, I think it still needs some work, but you can see that these white lines right here are shinier here than they are over there. So there's sort of like a hot light hitting them. And you can see that floor looks shinier, but it looks like a dull plastic shiny. So that just needs to be tweaked, I think. But I think overall, sort of the scale of the textures themselves look better. And once we come in, I think maybe some climate work in here too, because the lighting is really sort of dull and flat. I think this will be looking a lot better. So those were some basic changes that I made to this level that I think helped a lot and will help to bring it together. Yeah, I think I think being ready to do anything is a big way to learn, a big way to go into a new industry and a new endeavor. It's just like putting yourself out there and saying, I'll do textures or whatever it is, I'll clean up images. Just getting into the process is the way to go, I think, in the beginning. And then it just leads you in directions and that maybe you didn't even know, because when you're starting, you don't really know what you want to do. I mean, I knew I wanted to animate, but ultimately that's not what I wanted to do, so I wasn't quite right. But I think like an internship is a super valuable way to, you'll learn way more in an internship than not in school in general. School is very important, but it's super important, I think. And Double Fine has brought in some really good interns, and I think just getting the chance to have hands-on industry experience at a company like this, or a company that's doing something that you're close to what you want to be doing, is the way to go if you can do it. I know it's hard, or finding a mentor, reaching out to somebody on Twitter or whatever that you admire or that of their work and saying, hey, do you have any advice for me? Would you look at my stuff? And you might hear back or you might not. And if you hear back, you might learn something valuable. So yeah, I think mentorship, internship, anything like that, being available to work for free maybe in the beginning while you can is helpful too. Yeah.
Once you get past the anxiety of drawing badly, because I think that's one of the biggest boundaries when you don't want to draw, it's usually because it's just gonna suck. I don't want to do a sucky drawing. there's all this anxiety. Like I used to have that anxiety in school and stuff. But if you just, I think it was an old Disney animator or something. I was reading something, and he said basically, get a sketchbook. On the first page, draw a box, like a frame, like just draw a box, and then look up from wherever you're sitting and like draw that thing in that box, and then realize that that's where you're at, and that you've probably learned something from doing that, and just keep doing that. And if you do that enough and you keep doing that and you don't get up in your head about like, oh, it's crappy, or oh, it's amazing, don't get up in your head about that either, then you'll be fine, and just keep doing that until you die, and then you're good. You'll be a good artist, I guess. Maybe, I don't know.